What's up, my peeps? Joshua Smith at GSD Studios, and welcome to another Jim and Jay show. So who the hell are Jim and Jay? Jim and Jay are my personal health, fitness, nutrition, biohacking, overall life optimization mentors. These are by far the two biggest badasses that I've ever met in this space. I don't know anybody when it comes to these topics, you guys, that's more knowledgeable. So we created this show for our GSD mode listeners to have an opportunity to go out there and submit your questions here to the show. If you have any questions you want answered on the show, shoot us an email at jimandjay@gsdmode.com, and we will do our best to answer all your questions here live on the show. Also, real quick, want to plug our sponsor that makes this show possible is www.chekd.com/TRT Revolution. So on the show, Jim, Jay, and I talk a lot about getting your blood work done, checking all your different levels, your hormone levels, making sure that your body is operating at its most optimal self, right? So that is the company that Jim, Jay, and myself all use. So again, www.chekd.com/TRT Revolution. So let's jump on into the show. All right. What's up, our peeps? Joshua Smith here with another episode of the Ask Jim and Jay show. So Jim and Jay are my personal mentors, health, fitness, energy, focus, overall life biohacking mentors. These are the guys that I go to get all my advice, to get the energy that I have to operate on, take care of my body in the way that I do. So this show exists. I've asked them to come on this show weekly, as always, to educate you guys, answer any of your questions that you have. So any questions that you guys ever have that you want asked on the show, we don't care what the question is, what part of your health, fitness, nutrition, whatever it may be. If you feel that Jim and Jay can serve and support you in any possible way, shoot us an email to jimandjay@gsdmode.com. We'll make sure that it gets answered. Be patient with us. We've got probably a good 40, 50 questions in the bank that we're working on getting to, but we will do our best to get to all of them. All right, you guys, so today we figured we'd do something a little different than usual. Instead of going deep into everybody's questions, we wanted to go deep into one specific topic. This is a topic that we talk about a lot on the show. Jim and Jay both talk so much about living the insulin-controlled lifestyle. So we get a lot of questions about what exactly does that mean? What is insulin? So we figured we'd do a whole entire show dedicated to just talking about what insulin is, the effects that it has on the body, and going deep because it's such an important chemical, such an important topic. So with that being said, let's just dive on in because we've got a lot to discuss and a lot to cover here. So I'll start with you, Jim. I guess the place to start is, what is insulin? How does it get released inside the body, and what are the effects?
So insulin's a hormone that's released by your pancreas. Basically, as your body takes in glucose, meaning if you eat sugar, it's into your digestive system, it gets released into your bloodstream. There's receptors in your bloodstream that sense a rise in glucose and will want to equalize that, get it back to its normal kind of set point. And to do that, the body will release insulin. Insulin basically grabs the glucose in the bloodstream and will shuttle it into a cell. Now, depending on what's going on with your body, it could be into a glycogen storage kind of cell. It could be into a fat cell. It could be into cells just used for energy. Basically, there's that set point that goes on all day, all night, 24 hours a day in your bloodstream, and it's that regulation of glucose. And so when your glucose level gets low, your body will respond by releasing sugar into the bloodstream from the liver. There's stored glucose in your liver called liver glycogen that'll break down and release in the bloodstream. If your glucose level gets high, it'll release insulin to bring that back down. What are the effects? What are the effects of that? Well, if you bombard your system with sugar, you get a massive release of insulin. Some of you might feel that you get energized for a little while and then you'll crash afterwards. That crash is because so much insulin was released in your bloodstream. It took all the glucose out very effectively. It shuttled it into cells, and now you're in a hypoglycemic or a low glucose state, and your body has that kind of weird feeling where you crash. Sometimes you'll get clammy, maybe you'll get irritable or moody, and it's your body's telling you need more sugar. And so that's kind of what we'll dive into here about controlling your insulin level, so you have a steady, slow releasing, no insulin spikes throughout the day.
Yep, love it. You got anything you want to add there, Jay?
No, I thought he explained it pretty eloquently and pretty simplistically.
Okay, love it, man. So one question, though, a follow-up question I guess I have for you, Jim, is you said that it happens when you consume sugar, when you consume glycogen. And I know we'll get deeper into this with nutrition, the effects on this, but is it only through sugar, or is it certain complex carbohydrates that will break this down? Is it only through sugar, or is it carbohydrates altogether?
Yeah, so let's talk about the differences between sugar and carbohydrates, right? So carbohydrates, whether it's a simple carbohydrate or a complex carbohydrate, it's all basically just molecules of sugar stuck together, right, in kind of a chain. And so if we're talking about something like sucrose, which is just table sugar, that's a couple sugars put together, sometimes a single or two or three. And so when that gets in your digestive system, those are cleaved or cut up really fast, goes through your intestinal wall, and it gets released in your bloodstream as glucose, right? It's ready to use, it's already broken down, and it's perceived as sugar in your bloodstream. When you eat something like a sweet potato, that might have 30 or 40 grams of sugar in it, but it's in long chains. There's a digestive process that has to go on with that sweet potato for you to break it down. And so it's this long chain of sugar stuck together. Your body has to work to break down the fiber in that vegetable or that potato. It'll break that down. Some digestion occurs. It gets in your bloodstream as kind of a longer chain sugar, and then it's broken down some more. And so the difference is when you eat like a simple sugar like that, you get a fast rush or a fast release of glucose in your bloodstream. Your body will respond by a large insulin spike. We talked about that before. If you eat a complex carbohydrate, it takes longer to digest. It's slowly releasing glucose in your bloodstream, and you have a very low comparative insulin release to that. And so people talk about fast energy, slower energy from carbohydrates. That's exactly what it is. If you take 2 tablespoons of sugar and swallow it, you'll feel that energy within about 5-10 minutes, but then maybe a half hour later, you're crashed, you're bonked. If you eat a sweet potato, well, you get that energy that's kind of a long-lasting, more sustained energy throughout the day.
Yeah, love it. So, when I hear the word insulin, and being a guy that's not as educated, near as educated, of course, as you guys, but when I hear that, I always think of just diabetes, dude. That's like it's the first thing that comes to my mind. So talk about what is diabetes, what's the difference between type 1, type 2, now we're hearing about type 3, and how is that controlled with insulin?
Go ahead, Jim.
So type 1 diabetes is basically you don't have the ability to make insulin. And so that's diagnosed, and it can happen to a kid, it can happen to anybody.
Genetic.
For whatever reason, yeah, it's a genetic disorder. Sometimes it's environmental that'll cause it, but for the most part, yeah, it's a genetic disorder. And your body can't make insulin, so you have to take exogenous insulin. Type 2 diabetes is a state that kind of we're all as Americans in either a progressive state or a latter state of this disease process. And that's when insulin becomes less and less effective in your body. And so we could go really deep in this, but just to keep it real simple, the more that you have these high insulin events throughout your life, the more insulin that gets released into your bloodstream and the less effective it becomes. And so if you're a guy that has massive amounts of insulin released all day, every day, chances are that you're going to become a type 2 diabetic, meaning sometime later in life, you're going to be at the point where your body cannot release enough insulin to regulate your blood glucose. And then they're calling later stages of that type 3 diabetes, and they're even talking about Alzheimer's being type 3 diabetes, loss of sight, some more cognitive disorders, and that all I think is in part tied to the vascular damage that's associated with long-term insulin exposure over the course of your life.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, you guys, you want me to talk about the types of body types that, how people produce insulin, or is that something we save for later?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good time to talk about because it's one of those things where Jim brought up a point a couple episodes ago where he's like, hey, if you're the kind of guy that eats, like on a Saturday morning, a big stack of pancakes with syrup and you crash at noon, that probably means your insulin sensitivity is very high. And that's me. Like, dude, I crash hard, right? And what's cool about the different body types is we kind of each meet one of the body types, right?
Right.
So talk about that and how that all the different body types are affected by insulin, what that means.
Okay, sure. So there's three, again, this is for simplistic fashions and explaining it on this video. There's three different types of body types. Okay. Universally, the scientific term for body type is called a somatotype. So you have somatotypical expression, which is the endomorphic person, the Joshuas of the world. And again, he's not really that guy anymore, but he could be if he just let everything go, which is the slower twitch, muscle fibers, poor insulin sensitivity, naturally fat, chunky, heavy set. And then you have an ectomorphic person, and an ectomorphic person is naturally skinny. They're long and lean. They're actually a lot of the types of people that are most prone to disease because if they don't exercise and they don't eat right, they have a propensity to have the diseases of aging because they become skinny fat. So they are the kind that are super, super skinny, but they actually have a high body fat level. And then the third body type is like, again, I always default to Jim, very muscular mesomorphic, which means that you have a propensity of fast twitch muscle fibers, which means it's quick twitch. You build muscle rather easily, and you're a naturally muscular person, which also means that you have good insulin sensitivity because remember, the more muscle you have on your body, the better your body will absorb insulin or suppress insulin from spiking. So those are the three different types of body types. I think the most important thing to understand about those is if you're naturally fat or chunky, slow twitch, slow metabolism, endomorphic person, you cannot eat a lot of carbohydrates. If your goal is to be lean and functionally strong and healthy, of course, avoiding these diseases of aging, avoiding the inflammation that causes from insulin events, you have got to avoid carbohydrates almost your entire life. Again, I always default to my brother, who's a year younger than me, who's a naturally obese person, who was morbidly obese as a senior, junior, and senior in high school, and is now like 6'4" and a rail. He does not eat carbohydrates. He grazes. He will literally go to a restaurant. He's a very successful business person, but he will go to a restaurant and he will eat green beans and meat. Again, the whole gym mantra, meat and veggies will make your dreams come true. If you're one of those people and you're extremely insulin sensitive, and Josh is a lot like this too, you have to be very, very choosy of when you eat your carbohydrates if you want to be lean. If you're, and you can look at it too, is like if you're not genetically blessed, which again, you have, you're endomorphic, you're naturally chunky, you have the slow metabolism, the slow twitch muscle fibers, then you got to work harder than the guys that are ectomorphic or mesomorphic. It's just the way it is. And sure, it's not fair, but that's the way life is. So again, if you're one of those people and you want to remain lean and avoiding disease, then you got to minimize your sugars. You got to minimize your carbohydrate consumption. It's that simple. There's no ways around it. There's no calorie counting or if it fits your macros nonsense or doing all these things. If you have poor insulin sensitivity, you got to minimize your carbohydrate consumption. And as Jim says, minimize your exposure to insulin.
And I just want to add one thing to that too, Jay, that's very important to understand. No matter if you're a super skinny guy or a guy that's naturally fat, the difference is, the super skinny guy can eat simple sugars and get those insulin responses, those massive insulin spikes, and not per se gain fat for the most part. However, on a vascular level,
he's
we're talking about not just the way you look, but the way you look inside, right? So that guy, if he's going to be that way throughout his whole life and just eats whatever and doesn't care and has all this insulin exposure, you're at a higher risk for vascular disease, period. And so for even those guys, we recommend, you're going to have to eat more carbohydrates to gain muscle and to have energy and all that. But even those people should be complex carbohydrates so you don't have these massive insulin spikes.
Yeah, Jim's right. I had one more thing, and I kind of intimated, and he did a better job of explaining that. But we see skinny, fat people a lot, okay? And when you're really skinny, you're that ectomorphic physique style, and you've been just eating shit your whole life, probably consuming too much alcohol. But again, because of your expression, you don't look quote unquote fat. You don't have like skin folds, or you're not like a typical endomorphic person who does get rotund or outwardly expands. As Jim says, that inflammation is corroding your insides. You have massive cellular damage. as Jim said, vascular buildup, plaque on your arterial walls. I mean, you're very, very exposed and at very high risk of one of those diseases of aging. So as Jim said, it's not just about the way you look sometimes, it's also about your internal biomarkers and your vascular health. And that's why, again, we're so strident on understanding your biomarkers through regular and measured blood work.
So if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like your body then only has so much insulin you can produce over the life of it. Then eventually, like, it runs out, and then you're screwed, and then you're dependent.
So think of it. Hold on one second, Jim. Think of it like a swinging. Think of it as a door, and the hinges are well oiled and greased. And the more exposure you give this door to insulin events, again, mostly high insulin events, too much carbohydrates over time, the hinges start to wear out. And so eventually at a certain point in life, and I would say for most people who don't take care of themselves, and we talk about this all the time, by the time you're 40, you got one foot in the grave, your insulin receptors are starting to fail. Okay. So your door now starts going like this in the wind. Every time you eat any carbohydrates, you have a spike and no way to suppress the insulin. Because again, your receptors that Jim talked about in the very beginning, the beta cells that line the pancreas are starting to give out. And I think, and again, I'll let Jim finish, but I think that is kind of genetic, again, based on your natural insulin sensitivity. And so a lot of people, they do wear them out at a certain point in life, and then it becomes crucial. And that's why metformin is prescribed. And that's why they, put these people on a carbohydrate-free diet or whatever, because they realize that they cannot handle any kind of production of insulin anymore.
Yeah, Josh, your body per se doesn't run out. I mean, that can happen too, where your pancreas won't produce as much insulin. But Jay's analogy was on. I think a simpler way to look at it is like caffeine, right?
Right.
If you drink a cup of coffee every day, you're going to have the effects of it, and you could sustain that forever. But if you're like me, then you have 2 cups, then you have 3 cups, then you're drinking espresso, and then all of a sudden, man, you don't even know that you're feeling caffeine anymore. And you kind of have to reset, and that's a lot like insulin exposure. So if you keep building up until you're at this massive insulin response to get the same kind of result. However, like with caffeine, you can kind of reset that. So if you're at that point, which most of us, if you're eating the normal American diet, you're at some point in that analogy of between 5 to 10 cups of coffee and a pot of coffee a day. Soon, man, you just can't drink enough caffeine. So the good thing is that you can stop and start to live this insulin-controlled lifestyle, be more aware of that, and control yourself with diet, exercise, some of the supplements and drugs we're going to talk about, and you can reset that sensitivity. It's almost like cutting back on your caffeine or stopping caffeine and then going back to it. You kind of reset it in your body.
Yeah, love it, man. So that leads us into our next discussion here. How does food affect insulin level as well as exercise? Because it's one of these things where you guys have talked about high insulin levels with the damage to the arteries, and it's like, well, a lot of us have been conditioned to think that fat is what damaged the arteries, not insulin from sugar, right? So it's kind of the opposite of what a lot of us have thought, following the food pyramid and all these other things that we've been conditioned. So let's go deep into that, man. How does food and exercise affect it, negatively and positively?
You want to go, Jim?
Yeah, go ahead, Jay. We'll finish up.
Okay, sure. So it's actually a pretty complex question, because this is how I would give it. The easiest, most lay or most simplistic explanation is that carbohydrates are necessary in our lives, but they're all contextually related to whatever our goals are, and they're also time specific to when you consume them, right? So what I mean by that is, if you're naturally endomorphic, you're naturally fat, and we know that you have to keep your insulin signal very low, and that means that you can't eat a lot of carbohydrates, you're going to be consuming your carbohydrates in very specific times in your life, right? So what that would mean, like in our insulin controlled lifestyle recommendation, is you would literally be only eating your carbohydrates, again, preferentially around your workouts. And when I say your workouts, your weight training, resistance training, glycogen depleting workouts. So why are you taking your carbohydrates at that point in time? Because you're trying to replenish your muscle glycogen, which you've depleted from your training, or to keep your muscle glycogen somewhat full that give you the energy to power through your training if you're eating a very reduced carbohydrate diet all the time, right? Like my brother, go back to your brother. So the question about, glycogen and when you eat your carbohydrates and all that stuff in the storage form and stuff like that is just, it's the simplest way to think about it is, again, not to confuse people because we have 3 different types of body types, the way we process insulin and whatnot and release insulin. But it should be in the mindset that you're always trying to eat your carbohydrates relative to what your goals are, to your body type, and then the specificity of the timing during the day. So again, if you're a mesomorphic, you're like Jim, and you're trying to gain, or let's say you're just trying to maintain. But Jim's a naturally muscular guy, so he has to maintain a certain amount of carbohydrates to maintain his muscle level. He's going to try, he's older now too, so his insulin sensitivity is lessening. He's going to try to get most of his carbs around his training or on days that he lifts heavy or lifts powerfully or intensely, like when he does legs like he did today. He'll eat more carbohydrates during those days. Someone like me, who doesn't have the great insulin sensitivity. I mean, I have decent insulin sensitivity, but I don't have the greatest insulin sensitivity. I will always keep my carbohydrates moderate on days I don't lift weights, which is like 3 days a week, sometimes 4 days a week, depending on how often I can get to the gym. And then on days that I train, I'll eat more carbohydrates, again, flanked around my workouts, or even if at night, let's say I have a hardcore leg workout like I did on Friday. It was brutal. I'll eat more carbohydrates throughout the day and even at night, knowing that because I push my glycogen levels from the training so low that my body can sustain increased insulin and carbohydrate and then the insulin from the carbohydrates because I had pushed it so low. So think of your body as like a sieve, and you're always trying to replenish the insulin the glycogen from the carbohydrates based on your training levels. Again, and we're all genetically different. So if you're naturally fat, again, you're endomorphic, you can't eat as many carbs even on training days as someone like Jim can or I can. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, just to I'll go over that part just one more time. So the amount of carbohydrates is kind of dictated by your body fat level and your energy expenditure, right? So how is that important and what's the difference? So glycogen levels, we keep talking about. Glycogen levels basically means how much carbohydrate your muscle cells can store, and they'll use that for energy during processes like your weight training or you're lifting up something. Your liver also stores glycogen, and that's used to regulate your blood glucose levels. And so if you just exercised, you depleted some of those levels. And if you eat carbohydrates or you time the carbohydrates like we recommend in the insulin controlled lifestyle, you time most of your carbohydrates around those activities when your glycogen levels are lowest, then glucose gets in your bloodstream, the insulin gets released, and the insulin is going to grab onto that glucose and say, hey, buddy, I'm taking you out of the bloodstream. Where are we going? And if there's room in glycogen, that'll be replenished first. Once those are filled and their cells are calling for more glucose, it'll be stored as fat. And so the more body fat that you have on, the less close to that breaking that threshold you want to be. So if you don't replenish your glycogen stores very much at all, that's okay, because it's more important that you don't spill over and store more body fat. If you're really super lean or you had a massive workout and you depleted all your glycogen, yeah, you're going to have to eat more carbohydrates. You want to get the glycogen level up a little bit because you're more apt to run out of glycogen and start breaking down muscle. So I know that I didn't want to get too complex on that, but the more body fat you have on, the less carbohydrates you have to eat,
right?
The less body fat you have, and the more concerned you are about preserving and maintaining muscle mass, the more carbohydrates you're going to eat. But it doesn't matter what body type you are, how much body fat you have. We still want you to group the majority of your carbohydrates around your exercise activity.
Right.
Because exercise is going to deplete those levels, and you're more apt when you eat carbohydrates not to store them as body fat, but more stored energy for when you need it again.
Okay. That was well said, Jim.
Yeah, I love it, man. So, you talk a lot about, getting your carbohydrates around those times, but there's a big difference of what type of carbohydrates. So we talking simple carbohydrates, you're talking like, hey, have half an apple before, half an apple after your weight training, or are we talking complex carbohydrates? Does it matter based on body fat, body type?
Again, just for the fact that we don't want this massive insulin release now, today, and the rest of your life, we recommend complex carbohydrates pre and post workout. Now we have some advanced trainees that have been training for a while. They know their body really well. They know how to control their body fat levels, like me or Jay. Even you, Josh, you're at the point where you know when you're getting fat, you know when you're getting lean, you know when you're run down. I know when I need carbohydrates, and I'll eat a little bit more. Like I worked legs today. I could barely walk out of the gym. So I know for a fact how many carbohydrates I kind of have to eat to feel normal again. But I'm also trying to lose body fat now. So I didn't take in any simple carbs. I know that a lot of guys advocate simple sugars during the workout and all that, but we're talking about optimizing your health, optimizing vascular health, minimizing vascular damage, and resetting your insulin sensitivity, this insulin controlled lifestyle. So all of your carbohydrates should be coming from complex sources.
Well said. Let me add something that real quick, Josh. The leaner you are, and this is more for Jim was just mentioning, like the advanced population types, people that have been training and are, let's just say you're under 12% body fat. You're a woman, you're under 15, you're a guy, you're under 12%. When you're super lean, there are going to be times, as Jim just alluded to, where you are going to need carbohydrates if you've been dieting for a long time, or just to refill muscle glycogen stores because you've kept your insulin signal so low for so long. But that's for very advanced people. We see all the time in the community, and we get this question probably on a once a week, twice a week basis from guys who do not have low body fat or do not have low enough body fat, who say, hey, I want to have a refeed, or I want to have an insulin event. You don't ever have a refeed or an insulin event if you're fat, because then you're defeating the purpose of trying to lose body fat, because now you're flooding your system with insulin, which we know is causing damage and inflammation. And at the same time, as Jim alluded to before, you're also already probably topped off. So now you're just going to have the insulin go into fat storage or fat cells where you become fatter. So there's no such thing when you're not super lean or deprived that you have a refeed, okay? It's only for, as Jim says, his best description is, when do you deserve it? So you don't deserve it if you're fat. If you're 17% body fat and you're dieting to get to 10% body fat, you don't need a refeed or a reload of glycogen.
And if you're eating vegetables like we advocate as well, vegetables with every meal, you're getting carbohydrates. It depends on I like to count carbohydrates from vegetables, but they're very complex carbohydrates. They're almost like a third category of very complex. When you eat a bowl of broccoli, and you get 16 carbs, that's not the same of, as you're getting from like a quarter of a sweet potato. It takes even longer to digest. Your body has to work even harder to digest those carbohydrates, and they're released even slower. And so if you're following this lifestyle and you're eating green leafy vegetables or vegetables of any kind with your meals, you're getting carbohydrates throughout the day. And that's enough to run your brain and cellular energy without you having this phenomenon that Jay talked about, where you're going to have to refeed yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Josh, let me just add again, because I think it's very relevant. I mean, there's so many diets out there in the marketplace. These guys are talking about this if it fits your macros diet. And so many of these people are caught up or obsessed on this idea that there's a certain amount of calories that they need to take on a daily basis. And again, they're not figuring out insulin sensitivity or their body type. And it's so wrong, because how many times have Jim and I fielded this question, Josh, where somebody will say, oh, well, my if it fits your macros thing says that I can have 100 grams of carbs today, a fat person. That's because if it fits your macros says they can do it. And then they don't eat any carbs all day. And then they go to bed at night and they have a 100-gram carb meal right before they go to bed. And again, they're naturally fat, they're endomorphic, they have not good insulin sensitivity, not optimal. That's going to derail their efforts. They're going to go to bed and they're going to have fat deposition while they're sleeping overnight, because they flooded their system that can't handle all those carbohydrates. So it's very important that guys understand that insulin sensitivity is the ultimate determinant. There's no magical macro or micronutrient guidelines that come in the course of a day. I don't care about your genetics. I don't care about how much muscle or how much fat you have. If you flood your system with insulin before you go to bed at night, when your metabolism slows to a crawl, it's very likely, unless you're super, super lean, and again, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the guys that are high fat. You're going to have fat deposition, and you're going to derail your dietary efforts. So again, understand your insulin sensitivity. That's the ultimate determinant.
And a real simple way to think about that is if we go back to if it fits your macros and you say, oh, I can have 100 grams of carbs today, and my diet plan says I'm going to lose weight. Well, just imagine if you ate 100 grams worth of carbohydrates from broccoli or 100 grams of carbohydrates from a bowl of Fruit Loops, what the difference is going to be in your body composition.
Right.
And let me tell you, man, it's significant.
Massive.
If you don't think so, you're high as hell, and I want 2 of whatever you just took.
Keep doing it, yeah.
You're all
just keep doing it. I mean, honestly, Josh, I've had people reach out to me and say that. Oh, it doesn't matter. I can eat 3 brownies because I'm allowed 100 grams of carbs and 60 grams of sugar or whatever it is. And it's just nonsense. And that's, again, Jim and I are putting this out there. This is, if you're listening to people give you that kind of guidance, and again, I'm not talking shit about the if it fits your macros crowd. Well, yeah, I kind of am. It's not going to work if you do apply it to that life, not putting your insulin sensitivity at the top of the regime or the hierarchical needs. And that's what is most important.
Yep.
And that again just comes back to the difference between carbohydrates and how much insulin you release from those carbohydrates, right? I mean, same thing we're talking about.
So then when it comes to nutrition with insulin, because I mean, let's talk about the effects in another manner, because now we're talking, I mean, so far we've been talking about getting lower body fat, but we've been talking about, hey, you can still have low body fat and acquire atherosclerosis and have the other damage that comes from it. So kind of talk about that. I mean, what are some of the internal damages that nutrition can cause by those insulin spikes that we don't see, that we're not physically seeing inside the mirror? I mean, I heard the other day, now this could be a false stat, so if you guys are fact checking me, I'm not the expert here, but I heard that like 99% of all heart disease, which is really all preventable, or 99% of it's all preventable, and most of it comes through these insulin spikes through atherosclerosis.
Well, go ahead.
So the big thing is if you have sugar in your bloodstream, it's bad. And so if you have more sugar in your bloodstream for longer, it's even worse. And insulin is one of the things that causes vascular inflammation. And, I don't want to get too deep into this complex because it does get kind of sciencey and nerdy, but a good way to think of it is the more insulin that you have exposed and released into your vascular system, the more inflammation and the more damage that's going to occur. And when damages occur, your body responds by either fixing it somehow. And the way that your body kind of fixes it in your vascular system is through plaque. And so that's a very high level. I know if you're an anatomy physiology guy, you can base me on that and gut me, because that's very, very simplistic, and I'm leaving out a whole bunch of stuff. But that sugar leads to inflammation. Insulin leads to inflammation. Inflammation leads to your vascular system being set up to be damaged. And when it's damaged, it fixes itself by this plaquing. And so, the example that we talked about at one point was the marathon runner guy that has heart disease.
Right.
And, gosh, cardio's healthy for you. How could this happen? And it's because more likely than not, that person has been eating a massive amount of carbohydrates to fuel himself through those workouts. And in doing so, has exposed himself to a massive amount of sugar in his vascular system, and a massive amount of insulin. And then we could talk about the over kind of use, because in any sport, when you get to a recreational level and to a competitive level, it becomes unhealthy. It's just inherent, right? Bodybuilding, cycling, tennis. I mean, it doesn't matter, right? You go through the pain and you try to be better and better and better. And so that's a classic example. There's a way to do it, on a lower fat, a lower insulin signal kind of lifestyle, and guys are proving that now. I don't know if that's ever going to work out to be, at a competitive level or not, but it does prove the fact that if you're a marathon runner and you're not bombing yourself with sugar, you can do it and you can be healthy doing it. But that's a whole different discussion.
Well, that's why a lot of it's well said. That's why a lot of those guys are now moving to a low carb ketogenic lifestyle, which, as you know, Russ Scala on his YouTube channels has some amazing videos on that. I want to take Jim one step further, though, to make it more simplistic. And that was a great explanation. But just for people very lay across the country, because I know this is a very wide, massive audience we're reaching now. I'm going back to the Midwest on Wednesday. I'm going back for a family reunion in my family. I'm going back to see a bunch of kinfolk. I'm very excited to see a lot of those folks. But when you are leading an insulin an insulin spiked lifestyle, not a controlled lifestyle, the average American diet, you not only all those things Jim said are absolutely apt and correct, but you also have what is called glycation at the cellular level. And the glycation leads to all of this breakdown of, antioxidant sludge. Okay. And the sludge has to come through. It has to expire through sweat, through exfoliation. There's a lot of different ways it comes through the skin. And guess what it does to you, dude? It breaks down the way you look. Your skin sags. You just start looking haggard and beat up and aged, and you look like ass. And the average person who's 40 years old, who's not living, quote unquote, the way that we preach and practice, looks 25 years older than we do. Now, I'm not judging them, but I'm just saying that you can easily tell a person who is not monitoring their insulin by the way their facial features start looking. They start flattening out, the skin starts sagging. It's just, I'm telling you, it's as Jim said, it leads to inflammation, and not only is it internal, but it's also external, because the cells are trying to get rid of all of this bunk and these byproducts and this breakdown of this horrendous stuff that the insulin produces, and it does also come through your skin. So you will start seeing physiological changes that are not beneficial to the way you look and feel.
Yeah, and what's insane is our societal customary routines that we have. It's like when I was potty training my kids, what do you reward them always with? Oh, dude, you go to the bathroom, good job, you get a piece of candy. Halloween, you get a little candy, and and I don't know, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong here, but I heard that there's a massive difference between glucose and like a fructose, right? Like glucose can be broken down through the other organs, where fructose only can be broken down in the liver, which creates fatty liver, especially in our kids. And what are we loading them up with? Fructose. Right. Do you find a difference with glucose and fructose when it comes to insulin spikes as well? Or is it just like, dude, just keep yourself and your kids away from all types of sugar, period?
Jim, let me answer that real quick. So fructose is rate limited. So what I mean by that is that your body, and you're right, you hit the nail on the head, the liver can only preferentially break down a certain amount of fructose grams per 24 hours. And I'm going from memory, but I'm pretty sure that the enzyme is called glycogenized synthase, and it will not break down. I think it's like, even for someone like Jim's size, I think it's like a 225-pound guy. It's like 50 grams of fruit sugar from fructose is all the body will metabolize in the course of a 24-hour period. I could be a little bit off there, but I've seen a lot of studies back in the day. And the worst part about fructose, Josh, is that it is, after it reaches the saturation point, it is preferentially stored as a storage form of triglyceride, which is triglycerol, in the bloodstream. So guess what's happening? What that means is that once you overconsume fruit, you are literally having fat storage in the exact places that you don't want fat storage, which is where your stubborn fat receptors on your body are. Again, the love handle and the belly for men, hips and the glute area, the glute ham tie-in for women, and then, of course, upper back too. So wherever you have poor blood flow, you have stubborn body fat receptors, and massively sucking up fructose from the fruit-laden sugar drinks, from too much fruit consumed, will definitely do that. So, but also, to answer your question, I'll let Jim finish. Beyond that, it's the same thing. Okay, if it's a high glycemic starch, simple sugar, and it's fructose versus glucose, they ultimately still create inflammation. They still flood the system with insulin. They're still going to create the same metabolic or cellular damage. But that's why Jim and I are very anti-fruit if you're trying to lose body fat, because we know that you can't handle as much fructose as you can glucose.
Yeah, well said, Jay. Just to break it back down and make it super simple again, there's better choices of fruit than others, right? So some of the fruits that have more fiber going to release the fructose in your bloodstream slower. Yep. Your body's going to have a chance to process it a little bit better. Something like a banana, though it does have some minerals that are healthy for you and has some fiber, that's going to get released in your bloodstream really fast, as opposed to something like a blackberry.
Right.
Different types of apple have more fiber. And when we're talking about kids, let's be clear, man. Fruit juice is not fruit.
No.
A fruit roll-up is not fruit. Fruit gushers or fruit chewies are not fruit. If it says fruit on it and it didn't come directly from a tree, then you shouldn't be feeding it to your kid, man, because it's just sugar. It's just crap. Especially, fruit is sweet enough. You don't have to bastardize it by putting it in a box, with all these concentrates and more sugar. So if you're going to feed your kids fruit, that's great. I would limit it, to have not an unlimited amount of fruit a day, and I would also make smarter choices, like less grapes and more apples, something, more fibrous fruits than compared to less fibrous fruits. But again, it's not the preferred source of carbohydrate, especially for adults. I do like fruit in small amounts just for the vitamins and nutrients and phytochemicals, especially the berries. I'm a pomegranate advocate, and so I eat pomegranate. I drink a little bit of the juice, and when I'm trying to lose body fat, I use the freeze-dried powder. But that has some specific, very special qualities to it. But overall, fruit isn't the preferred carbohydrate source. Just remember that, very small amounts.
Well, the only other thing I would say, Josh, and we've said this before too, but it's kind of like a Jim and Jay rule. If you're fat, there should be no fruit in your diet, period. I don't care about Jim's right. There is fiber content, but if you're trying to rid yourself of body fat, you should not be eating a carbohydrate that is not an optimal source of energy, period. There's just no reason.
And we're not talking about you taking 4 strawberries and cutting them up into a salad. We're talking about you sit down with a serving of fruit. It's not the best choice.
Yeah, I heard a pediatrician who, of course, he got ripped apart with the media and by saying this because it's a bold statement, but he said to parents, he goes, you're better off giving your kid a Budweiser than you are loading them up with fructose. Not only are you giving the same fatty liver, but you're also, give him type 2 diabetes and do him much more damage, which is pretty hardcore. So the last question I have on this before we move on here is, and again, those of you that are fact checking me, these are just things that I hear and I don't pay attention to always the way that I probably should. I'm not the expert in this space, but I heard something like there's 29 or 28 different types of sugars, and they hide them under different names. Like you'll see things that'll say, okay, here's the sugars, but then there's like other, and then you see sugar alcohol, or you see other forms. I mean, there are other things. I'll say when people are looking at a nutrition label, are there other things that they should be cognizant of other than just looking at the actual sugar content?
So the one thing that comes, sorry, Jay, I'm going to beat you to the same point, but the first thing that comes to mind is they've now given they've given the authority or whatever, the acceptability that you can label high fructose corn syrup as fructose. If you're a parent and you're reading an ingredient list like you should be for everything that you consume, for sure everything that your kid consumes, and you see, oh, it's just fructose. Well, that's the healthy sugar. It's not. It's high fructose corn syrup, which is a processed crap byproduct of corn that elicits a massive insulin response. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things. The best thing that you can do is when you have a label and you see something that you don't recognize, freaking Google it, man, because there's so many things that, ways to hide sugars and carbs. The overall nutrient content should list all the carbohydrates and sugars, specifically the sugars in it. But still, that comes down to, what type of quality food are you eating? That goes back to my other rule, which I know is harder to follow, but it takes all that. You don't have to be an expert in any of this. You don't have to know any of this stuff. All you have to know is if man made it, don't eat it. And so if you follow that rule, you don't have to worry about all the ways that the government's trying to screw us and being, slaves to corporations and allowing all this BS with this labeling stuff.
Anunnaki. Hey, real quick, Josh. So one other thing I want to add is and again, I'm a horrible, vicious, guilty as charged, user of this, but Jim taught me this 3 or 4 years ago. One of the one or two things he's ever taught me in 20 years, but he did specifically tell me that this stuff, this engineered sugar that Josh mentioned, this does spike insulin levels. So all those people out there that think they're dieting and they're not playing with their insulin levels by having 0 carbs, but they're using the quote unquote sugar replacement, the people that drink, Jim, what's that water that people used to drink all the time? That's
Crystal Light.
Yes.
Yeah.
All of those things are causing a very exaggerated insulin response.
So same like diet soda, all that same shit.
A lot of them actually cause a worse insulin response than actual table sugar, as Jim talked about earlier, which is sucrose. So you got to be really, really careful. When I'm dieting to get shredded, all these go away. The last 2 weeks, if I'm, sub 8% or whatever, these things are causing insulin responses. So again, that's kind of an aberrant portion, but you can still use these if you're 25%, you're trying to get to 15, 12% or whatever and look better naked. But just remember that even these are creating an insulin response. And again, there's a reason they're creating an insulin response.
And let me make a point about that. Some people will argue that fact that you don't get a significant insulin response when you eat something sweet and there's no calories in it. But the thing that you cannot argue with is that that's changing your taste buds. When you're drinking a meal water and it's 300% sugar, 300% sweeter than sugar, your taste buds are completely different than if you're not eating any of that stuff. Meaning, if you bite into something like a piece of fruit or even a sweet potato or a red bell pepper or any kind of bell pepper, you go, oh my God, this seems really sweet. And so that makes it easier for you to diet and eat the types of things that you're supposed to eat. If you're constantly bombarding yourself with Splenda, that is 300 times more sweet than sugar, you're pouring that into everything, you're cooking with it, you're doing all that stuff. Everything you eat is fucking massively sweet, sweeter than normal sugar, than natural sugar. And so you're going to crave that. Not to mention, all those products are acidic and they get in your stomach and they destroy your flora. They destroy the friendly bacteria. Now, we could go into this a lot deeper too, but the more unfriendly bacteria that you have in your gut and the yeast and the candida and all those things will actually have an effect on your brain and your behavior. This has been proven. And so this is a cycle. Can you see the cycle just kind of feeding itself and going on and on and on? And so when you're drinking Diet Coke all day or whatever, and your body craves it and your brain says, oh my God, I got to have one of those right now. Is that you thinking that, or is that your gut thinking that? It's really interesting, and there's more and more data coming out about this that makes it fascinating. But if you're trying to live this lifestyle, and if you're trying to go to the simplest form and the best form of it, where you're not eating anything that man touched or man made, then you got to get away from the artificial sweeteners too, man. It'll straighten your gut out, straightens your brain out. Not to mention all the other stuff that I think it does to your body I don't want to get into, but it straightens out your taste buds. So when you're eating real food, stuff tastes the way it's supposed to taste, and you're getting those sugar cravings by eating vegetables.
I honestly, Josh, this is a whole other podcast for another day, but the gut biome is so misunderstood, so poorly explained in the national media, in the national science aspect of nutrition and health. But dude, if your gut biome is a mess, you're screwed. It goes back to the whole thing too about eating organic and not eating organic and having the pesticides and having the breakdowns and the particulates and all this crap on our, engineered food. It gets into your system, and without a gut biome to process it, or a healthy gut biome to process it, good luck, man. So it's this whole insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome, a lot of it is caused by eating engineered food and having no way to process it and get rid of it. So again, that's a whole other topic for another day, but I'm glad Jim brought that up, because it is really important to understand that any insulin release when you're trying to lose body fat is unacceptable.
All right, so love it, man. So the last topic here that we want to hit on. So what is insulin control all about, right? So we got the goods, the bads of it. We got the lifestyle, we got supplements, we got drugs, a lot of things that we can cover in here. But just from an overall point, man, what is it all about?
So the best way to think about it, and the easiest way to think about it, is every time you stuff something in your mouth, what type of response is it going to have in your body? Are you going to have a massive insulin response from it? Are you eating it for a purpose? What are the downstream effects of you eating this food? And if you start to think that way, you're going to get further and further away from processed foods, and you're going to get closer to natural foods. Natural meaning, man didn't make it somehow. And all of that leads to a healthier life, an optimized life. It leads to less vascular damage, less cardiovascular risk, less insulin. You're not going to turn into a type 2 diabetic. There's never a type 2 diabetic ever made on meat and vegetables.
Right.
You know, it's all from processed crap and all these insulin events. So the best way to summarize what an insulin controlled lifestyle is, we're controlling when we have insulin spikes and if it's for a reason or not, right? So just normal everyday eating, you want to take in carbohydrates, but you want them to be from complex sources so that you don't have these insulin spikes and you have continued slow releasing glucose in your bloodstream, which will give you energy to operate throughout the day. If you're an athlete or you're trying to gain or maintain muscle, yes, we're going to accommodate for that and give you some carbohydrates to replenish your glycogen, which again is the kind of the stored carbohydrates for your muscle by packaging the majority of your carbohydrates around pre and post workouts. So we're controlling the insulin. It's an insulin controlled lifestyle. So by eating the carbohydrates around the workout, we're anticipating a little bit higher insulin spike, but it's going to be used properly because it's going to be used to take the glucose out of your bloodstream and store it in the right muscle cells, not as fat. And so it's this whole thing, right? Every time you eat, you want to think about the implications that it's going to have later as far as insulin spike, as far as what that means to your vascularity, your vascular damage, your insulin or your insulin sensitivity over time and your cardiovascular health. Not to mention your fat loss goals or, fat loss maintenance or fat maintenance.
Yeah, very well, very well said. So an insulin controlled lifestyle for me, Josh, is I'll go down a little deeper from what Jim just said. You wake up in the morning and you take your metformin, whether you're a female or male, whether your dosage is 250 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams. And then you're again, depending on your body type, depending on what time you train, if you're training, your carbohydrates are very, very minimized and around your training, right? So again, if you're a mesomorphic guy, you're naturally muscular and you're just trying to maintain your grams of carbohydrates, you understand because you've been playing games with that, doing it for a while, hopefully. You're eating your carbs around your training and you're taking your metformin and your AM and your PM, and you're not flooding your system with insulin from, again, the carbohydrate consumption after 6 o'clock at night. So an insulin controlled lifestyle is somebody who is, again, depending on your body type, modulating your carbohydrate intake based on training day or non-training day, keeping your carbohydrates, in the majority part, earliest part, in the mid part of your day so that your body has plenty of time to process them before you go to sleep and slow your metabolism down. And then, of course, using metformin to suppress and lower your insulin signal on a regular basis. Now, one other thing about metformin that we haven't talked about, I don't think on our show before, is there's a net cumulative effect of using metformin. So what that means is that the more you use it, the longer you consistently stay on it. It's doing something molecularly, maybe in the liver, something in your gene expression. But again, there's studies that are going to be coming out about how amazing metformin is. It's doing so many great things at a cellular level, metabolically and molecularly, that you have to be on this. And over time, and this is just Jay Campbell opinion, I believe that there will be studies that show that it improves insulin sensitivity even in people that have poor insulin signaling. So if you're an endomorphic person and you're on metformin at a gram a day, 500 milligram, 500 PM for 2 years straight, your body will naturally be able to process carbohydrates much more effectively as you're aging than it would be if you weren't on metformin, naturally an endomorphic person. So again, there's a huge push, or should be a huge push in society, to get most people on metformin as a very safe and efficacious supplement or drug, because it's obviously a scripted controlled medication. It's not controlled, but it's a scripted medication to maintain blood sugar and to maintain insulin signal at a suppressed level. So again, it has amazing effects, in so many different ways. And I'm not even talking about like the neurovascular or the neuroprotective effects that it has, which are also being studied. But again, all these things that Jim and I talk about inflammation and damage, into your internal biological processes is suppressed, if not outright prevented, by using metformin.
Yeah, so that's something that we haven't really hit on yet. I know we talk about it here and there in the show, but we haven't really went deep on it. But let's hit on metformin, and not just metformin, but metformin and maybe some other. I know that you're a big fan of citrus bergamot and some other stuff. I mean, what are some supplements, and or drugs, whatever people want to call them, that you recommend, Jim, that help with this?
So there's two. Let's just break it down into two classes, right? We'll do supplements that are classified as glucose disposal agents, and then we have a drug and a supplement called berberine and metformin that are very similar. So let me talk about the glucose disposal agents really quick. Those are like your chromium picolinate, your alpha lipoic acid, cinnamon, and they work on a variety of different levels, right? So some of them affect different enzymes, but if you're a supplement guy, I know this is I'm missing a lot of parts here, but just basically these things help glucose get out of your bloodstream without the use of insulin.
Right.
And so basically they're speeding up an enzymatic process that allows your cells to take in glucose, sometimes with insulin, sometimes without, but basically it just helps sugar get out of your bloodstream. Some of them work pretty well. Some of them work, better than others. Like cinnamon actually works great for that. But we, on a health perspective, we don't recommend those as much as something like metformin. So berberine is an over-the-counter supplement that you can use that has similar effects to metformin. And metformin, as Jay mentioned, is a scripted product. And so I'll speak specifically about metformin because that's what most of the data is out there. And we have we don't have an exact idea what it does, but we can isolate three things that everybody kind of agrees on that it does. One thing, if you take metformin at the same time as carbohydrates, it will inhibit the ingestion of some of those carbohydrates in your gut. So if you take it with 30 grams of carbohydrates, you take a metformin pill. The thing that we don't know is we don't know how many grams of carbohydrates are getting in your bloodstream versus how much you ate. So we don't use it that way because when we eat carbohydrates, we want them for a reason, specifically pre and post training. If I'm eating 30 grams of carbohydrates, I want every gram of that carbohydrate.
Right.
The second thing that metformin does, the most important thing, is it inhibits the liver from producing glucose from its stored glucose form, glycogen. And so if you remember back to the beginning of the show when we talked about that balance of glucose in your bloodstream, when your body gets low on sugar, low on glucose in your bloodstream, your liver accommodates that by it takes some of the glucose from its stored form, glycogen, and releases into your bloodstream. And so when it does that, it almost always overshoots just a little bit and you get an insulin response to kind of equal that out. Now, let's talk about you're in a fasted state at night, right? You ate your last meal at 8 o'clock and you don't wake up till 8 o'clock. So you basically have 12 hours of this fasted state. And in that fasted state, your blood sugar will go up and down. I don't know how many times. It goes up and down all night. And so all night your body responds by either releasing insulin or releasing glucose from the liver. And so by taking that metformin builds up in your liver and it inhibits that process. So you have a lower blood glucose count all night, which helps you burn body fat. And you have less insulin that's secreted into your bloodstream for forever, as long as you're taking metformin. And so that's the second thing that metformin does. Now we talk about less insulin secreted. We're talking about less vascular damage, less cardiovascular risk, all the things that we talked about before. Now, the third thing that metformin does as a side effect of not having as much insulin released into your system, it makes you more sensitive to insulin. And so when you eat carbohydrates and your body senses that and it needs to clear the glucose out of your bloodstream, it releases insulin. And if you're more sensitive to that insulin, it releases less of it. And so what does that mean? Well, that means you're not heading in the direction of type 2 diabetes. You're stopping it and you're slowing it down and you're headed the other direction. And you're getting the same job done, meaning you're removing the same amount of glucose out of your bloodstream with less insulin. So now, again, this all ties into less insulin in your vascular system, less vascular inflammation, less vascular disease, less cardiovascular disease. And so metformin is amazing. It's one of those things that, everybody, they should be handing it out like Tic Tacs to the general population. The problem is that most of the data is from sick patients, right? Most of the data is from people who have diabetes, who are in the end stage or the latter stage of that disease process. And those are people who aren't going to change their diet and lifestyle. I'd once talked to a diabetes doctor that deals with a massive amount of patients. He had a massive practice. And I got him to estimate how many people, when they start on a medication and you have that serious talk with them, like, look, hey man, you're now in this part of diabetes where you're eventually going to be using insulin. You're eventually going to be, the disease progresses. You could lose your eyesight. You could lose a foot, all that stuff. how many people actually change their diet and lifestyle and try to fight this? And he estimated maybe 5% on a good day. So most of the data, I don't mean to lose anybody here, but most of the data that we have on metformin is from these sick patients and these sick populations that take it. And so doctors don't really, your general doctor who's not familiar with it doesn't really understand the anti-aging effects of this thing and how safe and effective it is for a healthy person to take. So I think as it goes on, and there's a study that's being funded right now that's going to study it, and hey, if this study comes out beneficial, and it shows what it should, meaning metformin is effective at doing all the things I just said, and it's safe to use, and it gets a labeling and indication for anti-aging, and I guarantee you that every doctor, there's going to be anti-aging clinics open up just to script you metformin. I mean, it'll be it'll be bigger than Viagra if it gets that indication, but very effective medication. If you can't get that, if you don't have a progressive doctor that'll help you out with metformin, you can use berberine. Berberine in my opinion, isn't as powerful as metformin. However, you can get similar effects out of it. So I've very highly recommended either one of those two, whatever you can get your hands on.
Yeah, I don't know how to. That was so well said. I mean, I don't really have to add beyond that.
Yeah, I love it. Well, we all have a good friend who very successful neurosurgeon that was just I haven't released a podcast yet, but he was on. I interviewed him recently, and massive advocate of metformin, to the point where he's like, everybody I know, patients, friends, family, are on it, and he's like, man, I bet a surgeon finger, that these metformin tests are going to blow everybody's mind, because it's not a fad. I mean, it's been around 80 plus years.
Yeah, I mean, again, I always say go to the LEF, Life Extension Foundation, lef.org, and just do a search on metformin. And there's, more than 100 studies all done within the last 10 years on its efficacy. I mean, they have the LEF people. And again, I'm not a big LEF guy because a lot of these people don't eat. They practice caloric restriction and they're like skeletons, but they take like 4 grams of metformin a day. I mean, they have zero insulin signal. But again, Jim is right. And we keep talking about this. The lower your insulin signal, the longer the life. You are not going to have inflammation. You're not going to have cellular damage. You're not going to have glycation. You're not going to have all these things that leads to the breakdown of the telomeres, right? Which is what allows us to stay young and free of like the quote unquote toxic effects of aging. So it makes a lot of sense. Now, again, I'm not a big caloric restriction guy. And then there's also the guy, Aubrey de Grey, talks about, senescence and all that stuff. And they're all part of that too, which is, again, not eating. But the reality of it is that the less damage, the less inflammation that occurs over time, the longer your cellular processes will stay intact. And in theory, the longer you will live.
Now, that being said, is there any, in addition to analyzing, okay, my body fat, how my diet's doing that, how I'm feeling with that, are there any tests that we should be doing? I know, the three of us all get our blood work done and look at certain biomarkers, but those that are listening to the show, are there any tests they should be doing on a regular basis to be checking this and just to going beyond just how they look in the mirror and how they're feeling?
So there's 2 major metabolic or biomarker tests, through your blood work, which is your H1ABC, and then you have a resting or a glucose tolerance test. And both of those tests are going to give you, and by the way, you can actually take those. You can buy over the counter. What do they call, Jim? What's the device that you can buy?
Glucometer.
A glucometer that can give you these tests. You got to, trick yourself and measure your blood and stuff, but it's very simple. You can follow the instructions over the counter. You can buy these devices for $20 or $29 in any Walgreens or CVS. But an HA1BC test or HbA1c test is a very good indicator of your insulin sensitivity. You want to have a level in the very, very high 4s or super low 5s. Like if you're under 5.3, 5.4 is probably the threshold. But if you're 5.3 and under, or 5.4 and under, then you have good insulin sensitivity. Your metformin, if you're taking it, is working, and your insulin signal is staying suppressed. Like Monica, super naturally lean people who have amazing insulin sensitivity by naturally, when they take metformin, I've seen some of their insulin signal or their HA1BC counts in the 4.6, 4.5 range, which is off the charts, And again, if you have a level like that, then that means your body is processing insulin effectively. You're not flooding your system with insulin, and you don't have a lot of, cellular degradation. So it's again, those are the two biggest tests. You can also, and I don't want to steal Jim's thunder, but you can also do the Jim, crude test, eat a big stack of pancakes in the morning. And then how do you feel by the time you're 11 a.m. or 12 p.m.? Have you crashed out? If you feel tired and sleepy, I need to take a nap. Well, then that means that you're, naturally, more insulin insensitive. So if you're good, 12 o'clock, you're ready to go, you haven't crashed out, then that probably means that you're, you have good insulin sensitivity. But again, it's much better to do the biomarker tests, which again, those are the two tests that we recommend.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Jay said, the A1C test is basically an average of your glucose levels over the last, 10 days or so, 2 weeks maybe. And so when we talk about overall optimized life health, so the things that you should be monitoring, it would be blood lipids and sugar levels. And the two tests that Jay just described are for sugar levels. And then blood lipids would be your total cholesterol, HDL, LDL, triglycerides. If those are out of range and out of whack, then you might want to consider having some inflammatory tests done, like homeocysteine levels or C-reactive protein, to get a further insight to what cardiovascular type of risk you're looking at. Again, the sugar levels you can fix, people. You have control over. You can fix that with your diet. You can get on metformin and help that. You can make the diet even more effective and correct that. The blood lipids, you can correct that with supplementation and diet. You can add things like omega-3s. You can add things like citrus bergamot and not go on a statin drug and fix your levels. You can do cardio and change your blood work immediately. And so those two things specifically, the blood lipids and the sugar levels, are things that need to be monitored. Those are the things that you should look at on your blood test and immediately say, hey, I can improve that by doing X, Y, and Z. And you can do it. We do that all day long with clients. I've done it for 20 years. And so those are things, we talk about all this being proactive in your health, and we recommend you getting your blood work done and all this stuff. This is to take the onus of your health and improving your lifestyle, right? Or improving your quality of life. And this is the way to do it. This is the first step.
Yeah, love it. Now, let me ask you this, and I know we're running along on time here, but this is just something I just thought of that I've been really curious of over the last couple of years. Because, you guys know my history, used to be almost 280 pounds, morbidly obese. I'm only 5'10", now I'm like 178 pounds. So, that was a lot of weight for me, right? So, but dude, when I was eating like shit, I didn't feel those ups and downs, the spikes. I just kind of, but like now that I eat really clean, if I do the pancakes, dude, I'm done. Well, few years ago, can your body build up a tolerance where maybe you don't feel those spikes as much? Because it's like the cleaner I eat. Now, if I eat shitty or take a cheat day, it almost feels like a hangover the next day, where I used to not feel that. It's almost like my body responds worse to it the healthier I get.
Yeah, I think there's a couple aspects to that, man. When you're walking around and you're obese, dude, you don't feel great anyway.
You don't feel anything.
Yeah. And so your sense of feeling good might be different, or your sense of being crashed might be different. Also, the way, one of the things like these 3-day cleanses and this week cleanse shit works. By the way, that's all bullshit.
Yeah.
The way that those things work is you're taking away the foods that really make you feel like crap. You're taking away these pro-inflammatory foods, and all of a sudden your body feels great. And so in essence, that's what you've really done, Josh. You've removed majority of these foods that make you feel like shit. Like all the breads and all the grains and all this processed bullshit, and you're eating more of a literally, a man didn't make it, don't eat a diet, right? The majority of things that you consume, other than protein powder, the majority of things that you consume are natural foods. And so when you add in something like, pancakes, which is a shit food, you're adding syrup on it, who knows what else you're eating with it. Yeah. Your body can have, so two things are happening. You're getting that insulin dump, and then you could feel your blood sugar crash afterwards. And also that might be a food that's adding to inflammation in your gut. And then, you have this whole kind of sick feeling afterwards. I do that a lot. If I eat a food that, I have a cheat day, or I go and eat out or something, and it's a food that has a lot of processed vegetable oil in it, I feel it immediately. Yeah. My wife even more so. I mean, if there's a drop in that, I mean, she feels bad right away. I'll feel bad for a couple of hours and then it goes away. But even when you remove something like the high heat processed vegetable oils like corn oil and soy oil, I mean, almost everybody feels bad from eating those. And until you take them away, you don't really know. And so that's again why that cleanse works, and that might be what you're experiencing as well.
Yeah, love it. All right, so I know we definitely covered a lot here, went deep with that. I mean, I guess kind of the moral of the story is make sure to keep your sugars, your carbohydrates extremely low. Don't be spiking your insulin, right? And any last things you guys want to close up, just kind of last piece of advice, just a overall general rule of thumb here?
Go ahead, Jim.
I say it all the time, man, and I truly mean this with every. I know it's not going to be meat and vegetables, but I truly mean this, guys. You don't have to know a damn thing about nutrition. You really don't. If you don't want to learn any of that, you don't want to learn any of this stuff, you don't really have to. If you want to optimize your health, improve the quality of your life, feel better, look better, if man made it, don't eat it. It's that simple, literally. Does it take a little bit more effort? Of course it does. Does it take a little bit more time? You got to plan ahead and cook your own meals? Of course it does. But the rewards are magnificent, man. I mean, you literally, your life will be better for it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, we get a lot of questions, both to us, and then we see guys now in the GSD mode, Facebook group, a lot of people who live a shitty dietary life in existence really struggle with a lot of the health the tips that we give them initially, right? Because you're trying to wean yourself off of a lifestyle that you've been living for 25 plus years or 20 plus years of eating like absolute dog shit. So the easiest way for those of you who complain about you've got the gut issues where you've got candida and your body is like screaming, give me shit, give me carbs. The first step, the easiest solution always is to reduce or eliminate all carbs after 6 p.m. That's not something that you can't not do. Okay. So if you're one of those people that has that horrible, desperate, give me carbs. I got to eat carbs. Oh my God. Especially dudes, like a lot of guys, they come home, they work their ass off and they've got that starvation principle, like hitting them at 7:30 at night and they just feed themselves like a whole pizza and then, wash it down with a box of cereal. Stop eating all your carbohydrates after 6 o'clock. If that means you're now eating, the dream meal of meat and vegetables, or you're eating meat and fat, if you do that, I swear to you, again, this doesn't just apply to dudes, this applies to women. If you stop eating all your carbohydrates at 6 p.m. and you do that for 1 whole month, you will shit. You will be blown away at how much body fat will just drop off you. And again, it doesn't matter your genetics. Because remember, when you're eating after 6 o'clock at night, if you're a normal person, you go to bed at 9, you go to bed at 10, whatever, you are flooding your system with insulin and you are shutting down your metabolism. And if your metabolism is already inefficient because you have too much body fat and too much inflammation from insulin, then every time you eat after 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock or whatever time you're eating, you're just destroying yourself. So stopping that for 30 days will radically drop body fat, improve the way you feel. And then from there, once you see it and you believe it, right? Because seeing is believing, then you can start adding in all these other steps that Jim and I are constantly talking about. Then you can start adding in metformin. Then you can start, cycling your carbohydrates or flanking your carbohydrates around your meals and doing these other things. But you got to get yourself to a level where your body is accepting it. Because I know a lot of people who have massive carbohydrate addictions right now and are insulin, dependent. They're on that spike. The door swinging like this. You've got to make a start, and your start should be, well, where do I start? What's my first step? Your first step is reducing, if not eliminating. And again, I want to say eliminating, not reducing, but no carbs after 6. If you eat any carbs after 6, it should be green beans, broccoli, salad, and vegetables, like green vegetables. So greens after 6 or no carbs. If you do that, I guarantee you will have a massive difference within 30 days.
Yep.
Just one more quick thing. Jay, pop quiz, hot shots, for either one of you. How many tablespoons of sugar is in a 20-ounce soda?
8.
6. 8's a good. I mean, I'm sure some, but just think about that. If you're still drinking soda,
right,
just every time that you pop that thing open, just imagine that you're shoving 6 to maybe some of it is 8, but 6 tablespoons of sugar in your mouth.
Horrible, man.
And isn't that the max recommended daily, like not to exceed, is like 5 or 6, isn't it? Like,
oh no, it's wrong. They actually say, even the RDA got that right. They say only 3 tablespoons of sugar a day, of like pure sugar. So yeah, so, I mean,
a slice of white bread, that's a tablespoon of sugar. At least, depending on the brand, it can go up to 2 or 3.
Well, Josh, Josh has said it before on the shows. I don't mean to cut you off, Jim, but Josh has said it before on the shows. I mean, the reason we have rampant childhood obesity today is because these kids are drinking those calorically empty fruit juices and beverages that are it's just pure empty calories, but pure sugar, which as we know is being deposited as body fat.
Yeah. And I say like your average kid now is what, like 30 tablespoons of sugar a day, which is like what, like, I don't know how many ungodly amount of pounds, 60 pounds of sugar a year or something.
Yeah.
It's just insane. Yeah. So, all right, you guys. Well, you guys, I know we went long here. Hopefully, those of you watching and listening, you got a lot of benefit out of this. Make sure to go check out www.trtrevolution.com. When we do these weekly episodes, you guys, this is just a scratch on the surface of what Jim and Jay do together over there. They go deep on a hell of a lot of topics. They're releasing daily content over there. You can also go get Jay's best-selling book, 5-star rated review, best-selling of all time book in that space on Amazon. He's actually allowing you to download it for free right now, which is the TRT manual, right? Anything that you ever want to know about testosterone replacement therapy is inside that book, and it's 100% free. So make sure you guys jump over there. Any questions that you have, shoot us an email, Jim and Jay at gsdmode.com. Thank you guys for watching and listening. And Jim and Jay, as always, man, appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy day to be here.
Awesome. Yeah. And one last thing too, because of you, I'm definitely making the book available on audio soon. My goal is that once we launch Optimized Life Nutrition, the book will be available on audio too. So we'll be able to package a lot of stuff up at that point. I'm thinking probably mid-November, most likely.
Awesome. And we'll keep you guys, keep watching out for those emails. We'll keep you updated on that and let you know where to go to download that once it's released. All right, you guys, thank you again. Have a great night, and we'll see you next time.
Peace. Thanks, everyone.